In the last section, we set up a user profile page that allows you to see another user's posts. So another functionality in a lot of blogs is the ability to send messages to other users. So when a user clicks on another user's profile, they should be able to see a send message button and then message this person. So this is what we'll do here. So our custom messaging system will comprise of 3 components. We'll need a send message component to actually send the message, a show messages component that will display in a table all the list of messages a user received, and then reply to message. And again, this will automatically set the username in the component so the person does not have to enter it in manually. And our messages will be saved in a messages table with the username as a reference. So we can look up and query messages based on the username. So let's go back to our app and get started writing the code. So it's going to show user component, and then under the username of the person, when a user looks at another user's profile, they should see that send message button right under the username. So let's create a button and then wrap it in a link. And then the path name will be /send message. And then we'll also pass in props to the state, which will give us access to the entire profile of this user. Now that we have our entry point for sending messages set up, we also need a way to show the messages, and we'll do it in the user profile dashboard. So again, this is the original profile.js component we set up that is our original user dashboard, and we'll display the show messages button under the user profile, and we'll do it in the same exact way. We'll wrap a button with the link, and then the path name will be /show messages and then plus the user ID of the user. And we didn't need to specify a unique user ID for the send messages because again, it's just a form, and the form is the same for all users. Each user will not have a separate form to send the messages, which is why in that component we just had to use /send message without a unique user ID contained in the path name URL. So let's now begin setting up our send message component, and we'll set this up in our profile directory. So let's do sendmessage.js, and then let's handle all of our imports. So we're going to need Axios, history, connect, text field because it's going to be set up as a form, and then a button. And then we can initialize our class with an empty div. So now let's set up our form. And remember, the form takes an onSubmit event, which we'll just leave blank for now. And then we're going to need 2 text fields, one for the title of the message and one for the body. And of course, the title is just going to be a regular input element, and our text field is going to be a multi-line text field. Next, we can have our submit button, and then we'll also include another button that will be a cancel button, and it will just redirect the user back to the home page. And we can leave this without any styling because again, it's just a cancel button. And let's now set up our handle submit function. So we'll do handle submit equals event. Remember, the event keyword is important here. And then we'll do arrow function, and then the first thing we'll need to do is event.prevent default, since again, this is a form and we don't want our browser to reload when a user hits submit. And then we do const message to username. So this is going to be the username of the person we're sending the message to, and we're going to get this username with this.props.location.state props.profile.username. So in case you missed the last section, we are getting this username from our showuser.js component, and this is a functionality we get from React Router. We're passing in state in the props object to the link element, and this allows us to access the username here. And we're getting the props from our render profile element, and we pass in profile as a prop and set it to this.props.userprofile0. So this is the user profile data we're getting from our Redux state. We're passing it to the render profile element in the profile prop, and then we're passing that profile data as props to the state property of React Router. So this is where everything is coming from in the flow of where we're getting our username. Then we can go back to our send message component and then finish it off. We need the message from username here as well. So we'll set that to this.props.dbprofile0.username. And this is the username of the person that's sending the message. And then next we have the message title and body from our form, which we can access in the same way we've seen before. And let's now combine all of these data points into one const of data in a JavaScript object. And then we can have our axios.post request. So it would be /API/post/message2db. And then we pass in data as the second argument. And then we can just have our usual .then and .catch helper functions. Great, and let's now go to the bottom of our file and set up our map state to props. And we only need one property. We need the DB profile of the current user that's sending the message. So we just do DB profile state.authReducer.db profile. So let's now set up our show messages component. So we'll first start off with our usual imports, but remember we'll also need a table because that's how we're going to be displaying our messages. And then after the imports, we can initialize our show messages with an empty div. And then let's get started with our table. So we'll first need a table element and then the header, which will be a row that just has messages. And that's it for the header. We don't need to specify that we're also displaying the body of the message as well. And then let's go to the table body, and then inside we'll do a Turner expression with a .map statement. So we'll do this.props.userMessages, and again, this is going to be coming from a Redux state, which we'll set up in a second. And then if true, we run a map statement on the user messages array. And then for each message, we just pass into the render messages functional component, which we will set up in a second. And then we need the key because again, it's an array. And then we pass the entire message down to the message prop. So let's now set up our render messages functional component. So we'll start off with a row, and then each row will have a table cell, which will contain all the message data. So in the first line, we'll do a paragraph from, and then it's going to have the name of the person that sent the message, and then title, which will be the title of the message, and then the actual message itself. And then we'll also have the date created of the message. And then we're going to need a reply button and then a delete button. So for the reply button, we can wrap it in a link because clicking on reply will take the person to another component, the reply to message component, which they will then reply to the message. Our delete button can just be a regular button that calls a delete message function, which we will set up. And then our cancel button can just go back to the previous page. And at the bottom, we can set up our Redux store. So in the map state to props, we're going to need DB profile, which is just the profile we've been working with so far, and then the user messages, which will just be an array of all the user messages. Then we'll also need a action to set the messages from our database to the Redux store, and we'll just call this set user messages. So we can now set up the reply to message component. So let's set up our usual imports and then the empty div class. So the first thing we're going to do is display the actual message. So let's start off with a header of message, and then each of our pieces of the message data can be displayed in a flex column. And we'll use the syntax we've seen before, this.props.location.state. And again, this is coming from our render messages functional component in our show messages.js file. And then we can also have the two other pieces of the message, which is the body and the sender. And then underneath this, we'll need our form to reply back to this person. And again, since this is just going to be a form that we use to reply to the message, we can just use the code from the sendMessage.js component. Because again, it's the same thing. We're just creating a form to send a message. So after setting up the form in a render method, we can set up the handle submit function. So first thing we need to do is do event and then event.prevent default. And then we need the message to username, and we get this from location.state.props and then message sender. The message from username is just the username of the current user, which we can get from DB profile. And then the message title and message body we're getting from our form. And then we combine these pieces of data in a data const. We then do a axios.post request and then API/post/message2db. And then we pass in data as a second argument. And then we can just have our .then and .catch console log error statements. So then in our map state to props function, we just need the DB profile. Now we can set up our action types and actions. So we're just going to need two action types, the set user messages and then the remove user messages. And now we can set up our action creators, and remember to pass in messages to the payload property. Now let's go to our user reducer and then set the user messages property to an empty array. And then we can set the user messages property to action.payload. And then let's just go back to our show messages component and check it really quick. And the render messages functional component should be a wrapped in parentheses instead of curly brackets. So let's change that here. And then we're going to need -ui in the import statements of the table. Let's now set up the routes for each of these components. So let's go into a routes.js file and then import send message, reply to message, and show messages from our profile directory. And let's now declare our routes. And remember, all of these are going to be private routes, meaning a user needs to be authenticated to access them. And then show messages, remember, is going to have a /:ID because it's going to be a dynamic route. And then all of these 3 routes will need the auth prop passed in. And this just passes the entire auth utility object to each component. And this is it. Let's now move to our server side and first start with the SQL. So here at the bottom, we have our messages SQL schema. So first we have MID, which is just the primary key, and then the message sender, which is just a character that references the user's username, and then the message to, which of course is also referencing the user's table and the username. Then we just have our title and body of the message. And title, I set a limit to 255 characters, and then the body can be any length. And finally, we just have our date created, which is a timestamp. So now let's go to our routes.js file in our remember server directory, and then we'll set up the express routes and the SQL queries. So at the bottom of our file, let's do router.post, and this is going to be to save the message to the database. So we'll do API/post/message to DB, and then we'll get our data from our front end in the usual way. So it'll be const from username, then we'll do rec.body.message sender. And again, remember, this is all coming from our client side handle submit function that we set up in the send message.js file. And then our username, title, and body are also coming from our front end client as well. And let's wrap everything in a string function. And then we can just combine these 4 variables in a values array. Then in our SQL query, we just do a very standard insert into messages, and then we do the name of our columns in our PSQL database. And then the next line we do values, and this is just going to be the values const array. And then we just do $1. And remember to match up the values with their correct column name. So message sender is matching $1 since that's the from username, the person who's sending the message. And then we just do comma and then values. And then we have a regular QRES and QArrow function. And we're done with the post message route. And then we can just copy and paste this for our router.get to get all the user messages. So one thing we're going to change is we're going to just delete everything except for the username, because that's all we need to look up the messages. And then our SQL query is going to be select from messages where message to equals $1, because again, message to means the person that received the message. And then we do comma and then pass in the username into an array. And then we have our regular QRES arrow function. And then remember to do rest.json because we want the response saved in JSON format. And then finally we have our delete statement. So it's just going to be router.delete and then /API/delete. And then here we only need the MID, which is the serial primary key of each message. So our query will then be delete from messages where MID equals the $1, which is the MID we're getting from our front end client. So this is really all we need to begin testing our app. Let's go to our browser and then sign in. And let's click on the forum, and then we'll click on test91. And again, this is a different test user than I signed in with. And then we'll just do a random message we'll send to him. Okay, let's sign out and then sign in with this test91 user that we just sent a message to. And we need to go to our profile page to access the show messages. And yes, this message that we just sent is right here. And if we test our first delete statement, yes, we do see that it is working. And again, I just have a few more messages here just for demonstration purposes, because you don't want to sit here and watch me send 3 messages. Then let's test our reply to function. And since we replied back, let's sign in to that other user that we replied back to. And there it is, perfect. Our message that we just sent from test91, it's here. So there it is. We built a custom messaging system from scratch using PSQL. Well done.